All right. Welcome everybody to Roleplayer with 1,000 Faces. I'm your happy host. I am Matt Yancic. I am the founder and head game master here at Manufactured Myth and Ledger Domain. And tonight, I'm super excited to have someone with me that, in my mind, so just to tell sort of a little story here, I've sort of been going through changes in my life where I'm like looking at things I'm doing, and of course I'm a teacher. But some things I've looked at recently as far as inspiration goes are other people that are out there doing YouTube shows based around role playing. And for me, tonight we have Kevin B. Madison. Kevin has been a bit of an inspiration for me. I have enjoyed watching his meticulous, thorough, almost line by line, point by point analyses of role playing games and adventure modules. But that's not all I've enjoyed. One thing that I am impressed by, and I am always just awed by, is his Iron Man like stamina when it comes to running streams and games. So Kevin runs a channel called Dungeon Musings, and he's been doing it for, I believe, about 5 or 6 years now, and something like that. And he does an incredible amount of streams, which are just super high quality, always fun to watch, and a super like dynamic and eclectic kind of range of games. So tonight I'm super happy to have Kevin with us. Kevin, how are you doing, sir?
Howdy. Good, Matt. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here tonight. So you just wrapped up a weekend doing marathon gaming. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So back, we started the annual gaming marathons really as something. We had just started streaming, so it was about 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and really all was it was a way of coinciding like an event gaming with friends of mine from back home, from my hometown in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And then what we would do is once a year, I'd travel back home to visit with my folks, and then we would also plan a day-long marathon of just running and playing games. And I would, plan something special for it, and we'd make a bunch of other extra things for it. And we streamed those games as well too. It was a different format from what we usually did, but it gave us a full weekend to just focus on normally one game that I hadn't run in a while. It's a carryover from what I used to do for my birthday, where like on my birthday, at my birthday session, I'd pick a white whale game and I'd run that. I'd pick
Mm-hmm.
something I hadn't run
Right.
before, or hadn't run in a while, and whatnot. So then the pandemic hit, and I wasn't able to go back home, and we had a bunch of people who we were playing with on a regular basis who were from all over the country and the world. And what made sense was to try and convert it into, instead of just a day, we'd do a weekend, and then we'd play with everyone who was there. Previously, we do about between like 14 and 16 hour session, broken up with meals, throughout the day.
Right.
This time we decided to do just Friday. We'd already had regular Friday night, Saturday morning, and Sunday morning sessions. So we decided an extra session, and that made about the same length of time, but it was a little
Mm-hmm.
more manageable, and it allowed for people to drop in and drop out. This year we took out, the game was Pinnacle Entertainment's Savage Pathfinder,
Mm-hmm.
which is a modification of the Savage World system to play more like Pathfinder First Edition, or like, to be honest, 3.5 D&D. And it was terrific. We had a huge turnout for the players. There was like 8 players at 2 of the sessions and 7
Yeah.
at 2 others. And then yeah, the with one shots, it's always it's a struggle. I tend to overwrite,
Right.
than so I normally have more material and I leave more on the cutting room floor.
Yeah.
This time I managed to get it right for each of the different sessions. Like everything that I had written for the expectation of what we would be able to actually get through, and it all strung together, and it worked out really well. Like I really couldn't have asked. It's a terrific game. It worked very, very well, even with the number of players that we had. I was a little concerned about the complexity, particularly of combat in that game, the slowing things down
Yeah.
or just not getting through people's turns. But looking back over the time we had, combats in that did not last any longer. They were still really exciting, and it went over really well. And I got to draw on some of the stuff we don't normally have on a channel, which is like we run a fair amount. The most regular games are AD&D second edition, so there's a lot of standard D&D kind of tropes that are in there. This I was able to incorporate psychic landscapes and
Yeah,
post-apocalyptic mutants.
Yes, I noticed that. So when I was watching, and I want to say I didn't watch all of them because you did like how many this
14
weekend?
14 hours.
Yeah, I was a little
Yeah.
I was shocked in that most normal human beings, even the most diehard game masters, won't do something like that. But I was shocked. I wasn't totally shocked because then again, I was kind of used to you doing so many streams during the week. Can I ask you a question that I didn't actually send to you earlier? Where do you get your energy from? Why? Where does this come from? How can I get some of it?
I don't know. Like the joke I always tell people who like commenters or viewers or whatnot is that like I'm like a shark. I got to keep moving.
Right.
So,
Right. Well, it's true.
I thought people when I hear I've got friends who are writers and like what they talk about is it's the adages that a lot of successful and popular art writers will talk about is how you like Martin, right? George R.R. Martin says, you're a writer if that's the only thing you'll want to do.
Right.
If you just have to write and whatnot. I don't mind writing, but it's not really the thing that I'm driven to. I like drawing, but same thing too. It still is a bit of a chore. I would be planning and prepping games whether I had a channel or not.
Right.
This is how I've been my entire life with it. So I love role playing games, and I love running it's great reading role-playing games, and it's great. Like that's definitely one way you can enjoy them. But there's nothing like actually seeing the game and what emerges when you're at a table with players. And it's totally unlike any other kind of recreational activity where there is that collaborative, structured, creative endeavor. And so I mean, having such a terrific group of players that I'm fortunate to play with, that definitely adds a huge amount of, it puts a lot of wind in my sails to keep things going, because the players keep me interested and keeps me on my toes, which is what I like having.
So do you think let me ask you a complex question then, like sort of complex. Do you think, or maybe a silly philosophical question, are you more excited by the anticipation and like the planning and plotting for it than maybe playing the game? Are you excited by being in the game? Are you excited after it's done and you're like, I'm never going to do that until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning again? Or like how does it work with you? What's the high point for you?
All of the above is high. I enjoy planning. I enjoy running. Like one thing that I do is that it's rare that I run heavily scripted unless it's a one shot or it's something that is intended to be completed in a certain time. Like if I've got a 4-part adventure, I'm not overly scripting things to have specific sequences happen, because I much prefer seeing what the players do and then responding to those things, and so my type of preparation is not it's not like scripting in the way you would for like a play or story or something like that. I may have ideas for what particular beats are going to happen based on what I anticipate the players are going to do, but I don't have that locked in stone. And if they go off the beaten track, I'm happy to see where the story goes from there. So there are different things though, like and the final one too, like it's rare. The only time when I come away from a session where I feel like, oh, thank God that's over, is when I've had a bad session. And that, I'm fortunate that rarely happens. But when that does happen, my most often response is, the get back on the horse that bucked you. If there's something, particularly if I can identify, if I'm thinking about what I've done wrong in terms of preparation or communicating the expectations of the game or whatnot for players, that most often happens with new games, and then
sure.
So each of those things, I think, there's reasons for me to get excited about each of those. I love the anticipation of what, I'm going to see how the players react to whatever I've got planned. And then at the table is incredibly exciting because you're having to think on your feet. You're having to, keep everyone else engaged and keep their, and read how everyone else is responding to whatever is happening in the session, while also sort of being mindful of the time. So you're going to be able to pace it through so you can. I really love ending on cliffhangers. So I try to make sure that I'm pacing things towards that. So I have a clear, stop point where we're supposed to stop. And then after either a good session or a bad session or mediocre session, it's nice to reflect on, okay, what happened during that time? What do I want to do next? I'm not really a meticulous note taker per se, because we get back to the game so quickly. I don't really have to worry about forgetting what's going to happen. So it's usually easy. And if I do forget, I can always go back to the channel, and revisit what happened and be like, oh, okay, now I remember what happened last time. And that usually prompts me for what's going to happen next. My notes are normally long-term stuff. So so each of those, and each of those are there's a different reason to be excited about and different reason to, be engaging with the game in those different stages.
So let me kind of rewind a little bit here. And you mentioned, and this is something that kind of makes me curious. You mentioned that there are sometimes you've been very fortunate in that you've run, you've had really good success with your games. But of course, we all know there are those games that are just like, oh my God. And you kind of turn them over in your head, you examine them. How do you deal with that? Like, I know how I deal with that, but I'm curious to know how someone like yourself who's running 3 or 4 games. I run 1 game a week, sometimes 2. And that I'm exhausted at the end. And when I have like a really, a tough one, I'm just like, I go into a bit of a coma. I'm super hard on myself. And I'm like, I'm never going to play again. I can't believe I did that. I subjected my players to such a game. How do you get back on the horse and do it again? Like, is there something you do? Are you hard on yourself too? Are you easy on yourself?
Yeah, to a degree, I think like what you got to be is, so we'll say it a little bit of a airy-fairy kind of way for a moment here. There's one of the most interesting things, little tidbits, this is a non sequitur, that I heard is that J.D. Salinger in like middle age became a Buddhist. And one of the things about Buddhism, or one of the central tenets of Buddhism, is killing the ego. So how do you live as one of the most successful and popular and well-known writers in modern American history?
Right.
But you need to, one of the things to maintain, to maintain balance and whatnot too, one of the things you need to do is kill your ego.
Yeah.
How do you do that when everybody, reads your book, and everyone reads it in high school, and it means so much to so many people, and so many people want to talk to you about it and tell you how awesome and great you are, right? That's something. I'm not a Buddhist, but it's an idea that I very much embrace. Like the idea that ego can be the attachment to ego and attachment to, to thinking too much of yourself can really be bad, not only for running games or interacting with other people, but just like in general in your life. If for satisfaction, having a healthy measure of what your successes and failures are is a good way to have balance and to have happiness, or at least contentment. And that's one of the things that's the approach that I have when I'm thinking about how a game went. Like if I genuinely screwed something up, I'm happy to just like, okay, well, I did that. Let's just not do that again. Things like that can be overmatched or undermatched combat encounters. If the result of after a game, and that's usually when I'm running games that I'm not familiar with, and I'm like, well, shit, I didn't do that. If I ignore the advice of the book and try and do something different with it, and then it doesn't work out, I try to be like, all right, dummy, like it's not
right. Why I should have read that. Like, what am I right?
Exactly. And and for some things, it's also the relationship you have with your players is such a it's such a dynamic thing, and you get to know the people you play with and the group you play with, and they get to know each other. Like one of the questions we get quite a bit on the channel is, how do I get on the channel? How do I get on the channel? And like, we stick right now to a roster of players, and we have for quite a few years now. And the reason we do that is because everyone's kind of a known quantity as it were. You know, everyone sort of knows each other, and I know that everyone plays well together, regardless of who Mitch happens to be at the table. And everyone recognizes each other's sort of foibles and whatnot too. So
Mm-hmm.
if someone happens to be a rules lawyer or
Yeah.
whatnot, they're not going to get on someone
Yeah.
else's nerve, you
Yeah.
know. So with that in mind, that's where I also think of like, okay, was this just the wrong, like, is there something about the way that I presented this
Mm-hmm.
or the way that the game was functioning that just isn't to someone's taste? You know, some of our players they just don't like the Powered by the Apocalypse games, right? Like the Powered by the Apocalypse or City Mist or Blades in the Dark or things like that. Those really highly structured or highly kind of not structured, but like those sort of arch storyteller
Mm-hmm.
type games,
Mm-hmm.
or story games. Storyteller games are White Wolf stuff. But the those games, they just don't like them. It's just not how they interact with the games, not how they enjoy playing a game. So for those, if they had a suboptimal experience, I just know that like don't run the game for them because they won't like it. It's just not the way that they like enjoying, interacting with games.
Mm-hmm.
So those are different lenses to look at what maybe went wrong. I try not to go too hard. I mean, like you also recognize that, or I recognize that some days I'll just come away and I'll feel like a game went terrible, or I'll feel like
Mm-hmm.
an interview went terribly, or whatever. And I consciously question myself, like, all right, hold on, like, did it actually go wrong,
Right.
or you just, is that how you're feeling about it? Because, again, like with the benefit of streaming the games, you can go back and watch and
Yeah.
have the attention on
Exactly.
the players you weren't paying attention to, or the instead of looking at the battle mat, you can look at the how the players were doing, and if they seem if they seem that they had a good time, I that's a better read on it than me, on a Friday night after a long week when I'm burned
Yeah.
out and
Yeah.
what.
And I think sometimes, and I said this before, and I'll probably say it many times again. And I'm a teacher for those of you at home, mostly probably know that. But I think some of the people that are the best at what they do, it's sort of a double-edged sword in that they're the best at what they do because they're so hard on themselves. But because they're so hard on themselves, sometimes it pushes them beyond. So there's kind of this line that people sometimes have to ride, and that was why for me I was so like I had to go back to your channel many times. Like when I was originally like thinking, okay, I'm actually going to try and interview Kevin. I was like, nah, he doesn't really. No, he doesn't. He couldn't do 2 or 3 or 4 in a week. What's going on? I went back and I looked, and you keep up that pace, and that to me is super impressive. But what's more impressive is the fact that you keep the games going in a way that draws people in. And I know that like a lot of people, some people love to watch actual plays, some people don't. Some people just like to listen to them. Other people are like, I don't get it. But one thing I guess I couldn't argue with, or I would always have to argue, is that you're on 100% for all of the streams of yours that I've seen. And that is, to me, an impressive thing. So I guess I kind of skipped ahead a little bit, but I was kind of like thinking, but that's okay. That's totally fine. It's live, folks. This is live YouTube. I did want to kind of know a little bit about maybe where this came from. Like if we could go back, what was some of your inspiring sort of media, or what were some of the things you did when you were maybe younger, or what got you into this sort of stuff?
Mean, do you mean for gaming in general, or for streaming
I guess
games?
gaming. I'm looking at gaming
Sure.
and like genres and things like that.
Yeah. Well, gaming in general, my path towards that started with my mom bringing me home the '83 version of the basic set for D&D, and I've asked her since, like what prompted you to pick that up, because like this was just at the start of the sort of satanic panic. I'm
Right.
not religious, but my mom is, and there was a period where like there were certain books that we weren't allowed to have anymore because it was going to lead to Satanism or whatever,
Right. Right.
But that was the first box set, and she said she thought it was something I would like. I was into comics at that time, and I'm trying to remember if there was ever any real like fantasy films or whatnot. I hadn't read The Hobbit at that point, so it was just a random fluke that she picked up, and then that just became that, and then it was a bunch of the TSR games like Marvel Superheroes and Top Secret, and then that led
That's
to
right.
like, Champions and other games and whatnot. And it just sort of steamrolled. Like once I discovered gaming, I never wanted, it was always my favorite hobby.
Were you like trying to write or draw or anything like that at the time, or did you kind of
Oh yeah.
leap into gaming as your form of expression?
No, I mean I drew as well too. Like drawing is a really weird thing as a kid because like every kid draws, and kids only stop drawing when someone tells them that someone else is good at it.
Right.
It's a weird thing where just and at some point people decide. I mean, maybe they're not interested in it as well too, but that really seems to be, oh, I'm not the kid in the class that draws, and I was the
Right.
kid in the class that drew. So I was into that, and then that drawing with gaming became a complementary thing as well too. Loved comic books, and I loved movies and TV too. So
Hmm.
it just became like that was an outlet that we could use to to tell stories and whatnot. At the start, it was just idiocy, right? Like it was
Yeah.
either I have my first DM was a kid. I think his name was Andrew, and he was just a masochist. He just wanted to, or a sadist rather. He just wanted to punish his friends, but like that did not deter me from continuing on with it. And I particularly loved reading them. Like the thing I loved history always since I was a kid as well too. And the reason being is learning more about the world that you didn't know about before.
Right.
And because it just, in again, kind of a flaky sort of way of explaining it, but it makes your world feel bigger. When you have a better understanding of the historical context of anything, it makes the world feel like a bigger place. And in the same way, it wasn't the term at the time, but the idea of these invented worlds or secondary worlds, as Tolkien calls it, exploring those things and finding what was going on in those, learning about the known world setting, or
Right.
learning about Greyhawk, or learning about whatever. Like that was just amazing, and I loved reading that. I'm still a sucker for continuity porn stuff, where it's
Right.
just like if it's the one of the early games we got into was BattleTech. And the game of BattleTech is a relatively simplistic game compared to other old school games, but the amount of continuity porn that was present for that game, like you
Yeah.
could read whole books that were just about these fictitious planets, and then what things, manufacturing was on there, and what goals you might have on
Right.
your objective. Like it's crazy stuff, but I totally ate all that stuff up. So it was a combination of like really enjoying reading about the stuff and also playing it.
This kind of doesn't surprise me though, because from watching your reviews of games, they get, I don't want to say technical, but you really do get into the relationships. Well, I think that there tend to be a couple different kinds of gamer. There's like, and it has to do with maybe the way someone's brain works or maybe what they're particularly interested in. People will often argue there's like that rules lawyer kind of like technical sided sort of gamer, but then there's also that storyteller kind of gamer that's not really so concerned with that. But to me, and it sounds like and I kind of know this from just watching your stuff, to me, I sort of see you as a sort of person that sees the way that the two are related and how they interact back and forth between
Yep.
each other.
Yeah,
So
I would totally agree with that.
it doesn't surprise me that you would be kind of, because I remember reading through like the BattleTech stuff and all that, and it's a lot of like information about what's going on. But at the same hand, on the other hand, there is of course the storytelling aspects of that. So BattleTech was it was pretty much exclusively, it was just a miniatures game, wasn't it? Or am I wrong?
Yeah, like they kept trying to put out a bunch of role playing games. Like they done 4 editions of it so far,
Mm-hmm.
and there's people definitely who play them, and people who have fantastic memories of different versions of them. But looking at them on their own, they are not any one of them is like, God, this is so good, I would use this to run other things. I have a special place in my heart for second edition Mechwarrior and third edition Mechwarrior,
Mm-hmm.
just because for their, I don't know, because of nostalgia, and that's really it.
Right.
But I mean, it's for the most part, it was just a miniature game. It was a miniature game that happened to have, a bunch of other higher level rules appended onto it as you went, but also had this incredibly detailed setup.
Yes. Yes. And would you say that, like, in a way, that's kind of like your toy set, and you were kind of using that and filling in the blanks maybe with your own kind of stories and ideas
Oh,
and things like that?
absolutely. Well, it was just again, like it was really interesting learning about the stuff too, and
Mm-hmm.
because the way that um the in particular the FASA stuff in the time. So FASA was the publisher of
Right.
BattleTech,
That's right.
right? So FASA did that at the time. When I was a kid, FASA had been publishing that Renegade Legion, Shadowrun,
Yeah.
Earth Dawn,
Yeah.
and I think that was. I think that's, and they also had the Star Trek license and the Doctor Who license briefly, but those were very very early in the company's history. In its real heydays when it had those ones, BattleTech, Mechwarrior, Shadowrun, and the way that they approached both of those games for the in-world stuff was all it wasn't presented as a outsider writing about a fictitious world. This is how things are in this land. A lot of the stuff was in fiction. It was the kind of like the stuff that in like the Watchmen comic where you can get the back material or whatnot in
Right.
that.
Right.
Totally same type of thing. It would be a news feed about what was happening
Right.
in the thing, and it was unlike anything else I had seen at the time, and it was so engrossing. And it was also you didn't know the answers because everything had a perspective to it. It wasn't clear whether there was whether what was being presented was the actual facts or whether there was they were a biased
Right.
narrator. Yeah, so it
Right.
was very very, and like you would be talking about that stuff with your friends if they were into it too, but like no, this is what
They
happened
may
to.
have a different interpretation.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah,
So then when
yeah.
was it? So Andrew took out his frustrations on your group, but when is it when you kind of stepped in and started running games, and then what led to you getting so serious about them?
I mean, pretty early on, I started trying to run things. I grew up with two cousins who were, one was 1 year older than me, one was 2 years older than me, and both of them were big gamers as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we played a crap ton of Dungeons and Dragons and Marvel Superheroes and Robotech and whatnot all together, and that carried on through to our so when we graduated high school and went on to college and whatnot. And at that point I sort of stopped playing with them, but then I met new people and other friends who I had met through. I was very fortunate to have a friend back in grade school as well too, who I still we're still friends, and he played in this weekend's marathon.
Mm-hmm.
He likewise we just became like great gaming friends, and we had other friends who sort of like would put up with playing role-playing games, but it really wasn't their thing. And it just has always been something that I've enjoyed more than than really any other kind of pastime. I'm not a sports guy, so I didn't really
Right.
give a shit about that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It just I enjoyed drawing, but in a similar way, like my cousin was always a way better artist than I was, so it never became my central thing.
Right.
And then just when you're if you really want, if you want to play role-playing games, there's two things you need one player and you need a DM or a GM. And if no one else wanted to prep or run games, I early on learned like, okay, I'll pick it up, I'll read it, and I'll run it so we can get things moving.
But did you
And
feel that you had a natural inclination toward it? I mean, I think I heard you say in another interview that you've always felt like you were a GM as opposed
oh
to
yeah,
a player.
yeah. Well, I'm a control freak, right? So it's
Well,
an easy.
I was gonna ask you about that, and I mean this in the most complimentary way, and in a teacherly way as well. What I've noticed about watching your games is that you do keep them moving. You do
Yeah.
keep them going, and I've noticed that if there's some hesitation or there's some sort of like maybe someone's sort of meandering off a little bit. And for those of you at home that are watching, this is what happens when you're streaming a game. Because from my perspective, if I'm streaming a game, there might be a little bit of chit chat in there, but I'm also trying to give the viewer something to watch. Is that something? Is there? What would you say? And I guess I might have sort of answered the question, or at least given you a direction to go in. What would you say some of the differences are between streaming the game versus playing on your own? And what's it? Which one maybe? How are they different? How are they similar?
So, like one of the things we do different, and I don't know if it's, different from every streamer, but like for some of the big not Critical Role, because Critical Role, I genuinely get the impression that those friends would be playing that game the exact same way, whether they were on their own or whatever else, because they seem to do it to make them laugh, right? Like to make each other laugh.
Yeah.
But there are an awful lot of other streaming games that are efforts to try and ape that success, where it is clear that like it's not people naturally playing a game.
Yeah.
There are scripted elements, there are whatever else, and that's completely fine. Like that is totally fine. But my all of our stream games are exactly as what the experience would be if we were playing at a table with no one watching. You know, like I've made it clear to our audience and to the players, like my primary obligation and my primary goal is to keep the players engaged and entertained. You know, and it is with that in mind, like my focus is on the group as a whole. Gaming is a team sport, you know, like everyone's got to be on kind of the same page. We're all working together to make sure everyone has a good time. And if it's fine to have like digressions and whatever else in the course of the game, but if things get to the point where it's disruptive on getting to the goal that we're all here for, which is to play the game, that's when I'll hurry things along here. I'll try and get us back on topic.
I think that that's a really a very, very so it's an important lesson, or at least an important sort of goal to keep in mind, because the thing, I don't know about you, but I don't know if you're on the Facebook and you're part of those Facebook groups and stuff, but like the number one question that I see time and time and time again is like, I have a player that's not really engaged and doesn't really get into it and blah, 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 blah. And I find that it's not really a question that you should be asking like in a role-playing forum. It's more like a personality sort of thing. To me, it's more about like, well, first of all, are you giving them something to engage them? That could be part of the problem. And then are they being engageable? And engageable to me is kind of like when a student is being teachable. It doesn't mean the student has to agree with me, but they have to do something like they have to set down their phone. They have to agree that, okay, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and allow you the next 10 to 15 minutes to try to entertain me while I try to participate.
Yeah, and it's a great... You know, it's a challenge when, especially in person too. Like when you're streaming, it's your attention is focused. At least the way we do it is right on the cameras, right on what's happening on the screen. Right. For all of our games, we use Roll20 or some other kind of virtual tabletop thing, and I can tell when people's attentions are elsewhere. You know, and when they're not, the problem I have with people when they're not paying attention to what they're doing or not prepping or whatnot, or what I sort of prompt them along of like, okay, you know, this is something you could have done on while you were waiting for your turn.
Right.
Is because it's wasting everyone else's time. And I mean, especially for our games, and this is how I feel when I'm in person or otherwise, we only have X amount of minutes or hours or whatnot to get to play the game. If every little thing that we do that wastes that time or slows it down is less time we get to play the game, you know, and this is where the team aspect comes in. Like, in our AD&D second edition game, the character sheet that we use in it is very cumbersome.
Yeah. So
what all the players have learned to do is there's like every attack that you make, it's got like 4 different prompts that it makes you go through. And if you sit there and if you click through them too quickly, it'll screw up and it won't display properly. So what all the players have learned to do is see where they are in the initiative sequence. They'll know when they're coming up, and they'll have it ready to go on a click. Just say, boom, hit it, and then they're good to go. You know, so that's just a little thing, but like having your character sheet filled up properly on Roll20, so that if we've got a rules question, we can have it display and have it, you know, ready to go. It puts work on the part of the players for sure, both in preparatory stuff, making sure all that's into the program, and then also to be paying attention. But you know, if a player is genuinely not engaged or not wanting to pay attention, there's a reason for that. Yeah, you know. It's like, say, like it's not the same thing, and I'm maybe trivializing this a bit, but it's like the thing about, like, you know, good marriages don't result in divorce. If something's going wrong here, there's a reason for it. So you can look at what the reason is why is that person not engaged? You know, if they're the kind of player who like, depending on the game you're playing, and depending if you're playing with a battle mat or something like that, or when they're distracted, if they're distracted during the talkie stuff, that may not be the stuff that they're there for. They may be there to beat heads and get loot, and that's it. Right. And that's fine, because if they miss out on that stuff, they're probably not going to interact with it anyway, so you're losing nothing. Yeah. If it's because... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this sort of reminds me of my awakening from about a year and a half or so ago, when I sort of started really sort of not serious, as close to serious as possible as maybe streaming is. And I started to actually go to conventions, and I had never gone to conventions, and I'd never run games before. And I was pretty much stunned by the diversity of reasons for playing that there were, and the diversity of players that I would get before me. Because, it's like if you think you're a great basketball player, but you've been playing with the same group of guys for like 20 years, and then you're like, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to play this other game, and you get your ass kicked. And it's not necessarily because you don't know what you're doing. It's maybe because you haven't sort of examined that spectrum of other sorts of talents and skills that can be on the court. And so for me, like, hearing you say this sort of stuff just sort of brings up those memories of my awakenings. Have you ever run at conventions or?
Yeah, I ran a couple online conventions. But it's been not since the pandemic began, but the year before that, I ran at the conventions, and then I also did these open table sessions where I'd allow, like, not allow, like, it's not like such a privilege, but like I would run games, and it would specifically say, like, if you're not a part of the player roster, come and join the game, and I'll run something for you. With the pandemic, it just became became more of a chore than at least the open table sessions, because I wasn't always getting the experience. It was much harder to write for strangers than it was for people that I knew, like, oh, this is what so and so will engage with in the game, and that will make for it'll make for an interesting viewing experience as well. But I did run for some others before, and they were fun. Like, I've had people come to the roster from online conventions, and it's good. I think it's really healthy to be running for strangers. I think running at a convention is a different animal than running for viewers, because viewers have an idea of what they've watched. In some cases, they've watched your games, and they have an idea of what maybe you expect as a DM, or what they may have thought what they're going to do if you were the DM or GM, and that is a little different than just like a bunch of randoms thrown together and then you're playing a game
right
at a convention. But
what do you think? I feel like it's really funny. So everyone listening at home, I always send questions ahead in advance, right? And I send these things because I don't ever want my guests to feel like, oh my gosh, where did that come from? But I feel like we've answered so many questions completely out of order, but I'm totally fine with that. Like, I'm totally fine with it, because like I'm bouncing around on my list, and I'm like, wait a minute, how did we get there? And then we went there. I was gonna say, actually, I was gonna ask you. So do you what do you think? Like, get rid of that ego, and then also get rid of like modesty. And can you tell me, what is it that you bring to the table? What do you do so well as a game master? What are you happy about yourself with?
I think and this is based on feedback that we've got from either from players or from viewers, enthusiasm. And it's if you are enthusiastic and excited about what you're doing, that's going to get yes, I know. Anna Banana's made a cameo.
Feel free to bring her. No problem. Happens all the time. It wouldn't be Roleplayer with 1,000 faces if there weren't an animal cameo.
She's a running feature on our channel. So
yeah, I'm honored to have her on mine.
Oh, good. Yeah, she was very excited to say hi to everybody. It's the enthusiasm is the thing that I think that helps, because if the DM or the GM or whatnot, if you're excited and ready to dive into that stuff, it's easy for it to translate over for the players to get excited. And for me, like, my games they're not easy, I don't think. Like, I mean, in terms of like the scale of challenge that the players would go with, but I am so excited for when the players get a successful thing. Like, if they roll well on attacks or damage, they get a great result, I am cheering along with the players as well.
Right. And I've noticed that. Yes.
Yeah, and like, I think that is funny, because I watched the Critical Role finale, the big fight they had last week, And I was like, man, like Matt runs a very different game than what I do, because and I mean, it's a different dynamic with different players, obviously. So it's not a right or wrong thing, but like, I'm so much invested in, and like right along with the emotions of the players as they're getting engaged with different things, right? They know that like when challenges are presented, or if someone gets a bad hit, like in one of our sessions over the gaming marathon, everyone they became aware that there was this pending invasion, and the town where they were all located, they needed to go out and get allies. And so the party split up, and they were all like meeting with different people, and we were running it as sort of this it's called a dramatic task in Savage Pathfinder or Savage Worlds, but it's like a skill challenge in fourth edition, and I think skill challenges are sort of making a comeback in fifth edition thanks to Matt Colville.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but so they're all doing their own thing, and then things sort of went sideways, and they were attacked by assassins sent by the invading force, and some of them went well and some of them went poorly, you know, and it just whatever, you know, I don't relish when players have things turn against them, you know, but I don't shy away from it. You know, if the stakes we play with in our games are for keeps. But when the players get those awesome last-minute turnabouts, and we had really fantastic rolls, 3 rolls over the course of the weekend in particular that were clinch rolls that changed things, right? And I get excited. I mean, I'm getting excited talking about it now, but by having a genuine investment in the player success and the character success, I don't know. I think that helps carry people along with that as well. And if you get 1 or 2 other ones, so I mean, sometimes people just won't be engaged, and that's fine, and that's part of setting up the dynamic of the players that you're playing with. But that's something I think that that's a thing I do at the table. I think is helpful for keeping the games going and whatever.
I would totally agree. And for those of you that haven't watched any of Kevin's streams, you should check them out for that. Like I kind of realized that I tend to have a bit of a sense of humor about everything I do. And one of the things I noticed about myself is that sometimes I was making jokes about people failing, but it was meant to be kind of like, haha, isn't this a silly situation we're in? And one of the things I learned once by playing with someone that I never knew before is that some people get upset by that. And I know that seems like a really obvious thing, but as a teacher of 20 years, I didn't quite get that even. So I would say that I appreciate your enthusiasm.
One of the things I wonder is, like, one of the things I readily do, like regular viewers of my channel know that I'm a lawyer in the daytime, right? And one of the ways that it's easy to that I sort of, and this is just my personality anyway, a lot of self-deprecating humor is stuff that I'll make light of or whatever else, and we do this in the game as well too. I will happily, we'll tease some of the players because we've been friends now for years, but it's also like I am first turning that on me. Yeah. And I wonder whether as a teacher you can't do that, because you don't want to open the door for kids to be able to undermine
that is a very interesting thing. Now, so there's a couple ways to go with this. So first of all, the thing you need to know about me is that I grew up primarily on David Letterman. I would watch David Letterman constantly. And if you know anything about David Letterman, he is self-deprecating to the max. Like, he's always making jokes about how bad the show is, how he's a failure at something or whatever. So I kind of got a little bit of that ingrained in me. Now, one thing I do as a teacher, and now this has become Teacher with 1,000 Faces, is I will actually pretend not to know something in order to irritate my kids to the point that they start teaching it back to me. So that is something that I will do. On the other hand, though, you're right. I try not to self-deprecate, because there is a line between being the student's friend and being the student's authority figure. And I got into a lot of trouble in the beginning of my career. I've been teaching for about 20-something years, and I got into a lot of trouble in the beginning of my career because I couldn't figure out why I was super popular as a teacher, and yet I could not... I didn't have the control over the classroom that other teachers had. And when I sort of realized something that actually does sort of apply to role-playing games, I shifted my focus from being in the immediate moment and trying to get validation and happiness in the classroom at that immediate moment, and finding happiness and validation in students' long-term kind of success, and taking a look at the bigger picture where things sort of go. Like, okay, maybe you think I'm a bit of a hard ass in the first couple classes, but when you see what you can do in the third class, or what you see what happens and pays off with this villain, or maybe with this malady that is, you know, you're suffering from, or this character that's really irritating, when you see by the fourth game what happens. And so I sort of like took that as a lesson, and I looked at more of the long-term marathon-like approach, as opposed to like running a race where I need immediate validation at that moment. So
when I wonder if it also relates to, like, for myself, what it is to areas that I'm happy to look foolish in. You know, like
right.
One story I've told the channel before too is how I had a client one time who they had an oil leak on their property because they were digging a horse, like a, what do you call it, like a horse paddock or something like that. And they hired some Yahoo, and then they dug up, and I live in Alberta, so of course it's an oil pipeline, and they hit the pipeline, and there's a bunch of a spill. So I'm meeting with the clients, trying to get an idea of what's happened. And as I'm talking to them, I'm asking, I couldn't, my brain just couldn't find the word stable. So I was like, a horse garage? And they were like, and they laughed it up, and I was like, yep, there you go. So greenhorn, you know, blah, blah, blah. Totally don't care if I look like an idiot not knowing anything about farms or whatnot too, but I wouldn't make those jokes about my knowledge of the law or my knowledge of you know, that stuff. So in a similar way too, you know, I mean, the running games is a hell of a lot less serious than my day job. But at the same time too, I think you sort of get a sense of what the stuff that is productive to sort of joke about. Like, if someone, like, we all laugh now, like if someone has a terrible turn of luck, right? Like we have one of our the guy Brent, who I play with for like since grade 2. He has the worst luck of anyone I've ever played with. He could not get a, you know, great luck. So, and sure enough, we saw this on full display over the weekend. We were just rolling crap and crap, and like, we're not laughing at him. We're just like, he's laughing along with it too. And like, I think that also helps to blunt the force of it. But like, if something genuinely bad happens, like we have in some of the old school games we play, they are very unforgiving. And when a character dies, you know, like, we wait and see what the response is first before we start trying to you know, I'm not going to laugh at that, because
we want to know how this person feels about this character they've invested in over could be years, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I mean, anyone, like, there's a great joke from Community where I think it's the pilot too, where they joke about you know, people want to make connections with things. That's why I can tell you that, like, this, I can't remember what the line is, but it's like this pencil's name is Jeff, and now a little bit of you dies. And it's like absolutely, that is absolutely what it's about. Is that, like, you can't help but get some kind of investment if you're a role player in your character. It may not be to the point that, like, you're going to weep and you know, have a, you know, ceremony for them or something like that. But I mean, you're not without some sort of investment, regardless of whatever game you're playing, an old school game or a new game that has lots of, you know, like edges off kind of rules. You're still going to have investment and feel lost if that character is died. So different players will react different ways. You know, I've had characters die too, but it's usually because I'm sick of playing that character, and I didn't realize I was sick of playing that character, and then I'm like, oh.
And you're being
I was just like being flippant with them and didn't really, you know, and if I had been smarter, I would have retired that character and made something I was more invested in. Sometimes players are like that, but.
Is there a time when do you ever feel that as a GM? Do you ever sort of say, and I know as a teacher, I could never sit there and say, you know what, I'm kind of sick of this class. I'll see you guys, see you guys later. Sorry. I know that as a GM, we never, like, I would guess that you've thought of this and agree with this. I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth. But when you're in the game and when you've promised to give 4 or 5 hours of great entertainment, you do your best. But is there a time when you're like, you know what, I'm not feeling this game anymore. How am I going to tell my players? Or how do you deal with that sort of?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we had quite a few. I mean, some campaigns will just fall apart on their own. Like, because we don't run, for the most part, we run some one-shots or some short-term adventures on the channel, but mostly it's like, this is exactly the same type of campaign I would run if I was on my own. If I had no channel. I mean, not on my own. I don't want to have, like, stick figure people that I'd be
Right.
talking to. But like if I had players and I did them a channel, I'd be running them the exact same way. We play with something until it's not fun anymore, or until the game falls apart. And that sometimes, more often than not, just like in real life sessions or face to face sessions when that aren't being streamed, a lot of times it's life circumstances that happen.
Yeah.
You know, someone has a change in their job and now they're not available anymore, or someone has other stuff going on in their life and they're not able to engage with the game in the same way that they are. You know, I'm in my mid 40s, and a lot of my players, I mean, the players run the gamut from like mid 20s up to early 60s, and that's a whole lot of different things that can be happening in an adult's life. Divorce, you know,
Yeah.
kids, all that kind of stuff. So just sometimes when stuff happens, or sometimes people just get they decide that the game's not for them anymore, you know. And you just, I mean, if a game is not tenable any longer, then it's just not tenable, right? Like if I have a sense of when a game is in need of, or at least I try to have a sense of when it needs in rejuvenation. Any
Mhm.
long-term campaign, just like any other long-term endeavor, is going to have times when your interest will flag, or it'll feel
Yeah.
that it is tired, or just not
Yeah.
interesting anymore, you know. And it's a matter of, you know, do you put that aside, or do you push through? One thing I will never do is push through to the end of a story, because the last bit of it's going to suck. You know, if you're doing it out of sense of obligation, I have almost an allergy to obligation, so it will be a terrible project, right?
Yeah.
That for people who are viewers, I mean, that is frustrating sometimes. We had a Delta Green game that we started, and it just, there was a bunch of things that I felt were wrong with it too. The chemistry was a little weird in the game. The way I set up the game was not, it just wasn't a good idea.
Hmm.
I didn't communicate to the players well enough what the expectations were for it. And then I was using a very arch kind of contrivance of introducing backstory through flashbacks at the start of each session when
Hmm.
these were 2-hour sessions. So
Right.
there's a lot of things that were wrong with it, and I just got to a point where I said, like, guys, I don't think this is working anymore. Like, I'm going to run something different on those days, and you
Right.
guys are welcome to play in it, but for now I'm going to put this aside because it doesn't feel like it's working. And because we have an audience as well, I often will record something for the audience to explain, this is what's happened, this is where things are going.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and that's a more authentic experience for what happens with actual gaming groups, I think,
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
lot of cases.
I would agree with that, and I'd say that it's also a healthy lesson again for because I think I approach everything as a teacher, and I see everyone else in the world as like students, even though
Yeah.
sometimes I am a student myself, but or I'm often a student myself. Um, but I think it's a good lesson for people, and it gives them an okay and an out to be forgiving with themselves, and to also like honestly diagnose what may or may not be happening with their game and why the thing may not have gelled, and maybe ways to fix it, and then maybe even opportunities to sit down with the players and say, hey, can we reboot, or can we try this again? Or I think that that's actually an important lesson just for, you know, people that might be watching.
Yeah, and you know, and if you are reflective or like self-reflective about the game too, there's great lessons you can learn from that as well.
Mm.
You know, like the Delta Green game, it was unfortunate the way it worked out, but I learned a ton of things from that, of what not to do next time, and different things that I think did work or would have worked better.
Yeah.
And then it also involved talking to some of the players afterwards too about like what their experience was with it, and having the willingness for the players to be able to tell you how they're feeling. One thing I don't do is the regular check-ins. Like, I know that there's a lot of advice that's out there about like checking with your players, ask
Yeah.
them this or ask them that, and like the reason I find that that's not helpful is because I don't want to play to the audience. I want to keep my, and this is just my own approach for DMing, but like I want to throw out there what I think is going to make for interesting stuff,
Right.
and then see how the players respond to it. I have inklings of what they like, but often, you know, everyone is to a degree self-deceptive with themselves, and what they say that they want or say that they don't want or whatnot is not often accurate. You know, a lot of my players also have their own channels or their own podcasts or whatnot too, and I've told them that I don't listen to them because I don't want to have that extra voice in my head of what one person's experience was with the group experience affecting how I'm going to be approaching my own interaction with that group.
Right.
Because you know, like so I think there's, for other people, like maybe they may find it more that sort of feedback is helpful and productive for reorienting a game or whatnot. But for myself, I don't find that's the case. I don't it's not that I don't appreciate other people's insights or whatnot.
Hmm.
It's just that if you have too many people telling you what should be happening or getting an idea of what did work or
Yes.
didn't work, it's just going to completely screw up your planning
Yeah,
for it. You'll get
it
way too
can
inside.
it can overload you. And I think that there
Yeah.
needs to be some sort of, even though of course I try to listen to what my players are saying and I try to riff on what they do in one game and I try not to allow my ideas to be set in stone. There is, I would say my better games are the ones where I sort of trust my instincts. I listen to what the players are saying. I make adjustments based on that, and I sort of keep with the flow and change and course correct when I just sort of feel it, and not necessarily when
Yep.
someone tells me. Necessarily, when someone
Yep.
tells
I
me
completely agree.
to change. So then, what was it that like prompted you to decide? You know what? I'm going to stream this. Like, what am I
Um,
like? Why did you one day just sort of decide, I'm gonna stream it and see what people do?
I don't, you know, like, I mean, I've, so like in the past, I've, you know, my day job I've been doing now for more than 10 years, and I was pursuing that goal for before that. But I've always had some kind of side thing, you know, like our, our marketing person has, in my firm, has told me that I have the best work-life balance. I still work a lot, but I mean, like, I'm very conscious of not wrapping myself up in the identity of my job, right? And I've always had things that have been aside. I've done web comics before. We published a comic on our own before I got into streaming, and so I've always kind of like done things that are like fun. I like having keep myself busy and having side sort of projects to be
Mm-hmm.
working on,
Mm-hmm.
and I only became aware what streaming was and how easy it was to do in around the time we started doing it. You know, I did not realize how simple it was and how relatively cheap it was to get the materials you needed to start streaming. And like, if you see our early games, like they're awful. Like the etiquette is awful on it. What we're using for the display is awful. I had someone recently post on like our first video of like, I know this is 6 years ago, and I know that this is your first time, but like eating on stream is really bad form.
You know what's funny? No, 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 no. That's so funny. Okay, okay. Stop for a second, because I
Yeah.
went back and I was like, I want to see what his first game looks like, and I don't know if I watched your first game. But
Mm.
I watched the very first, what I think is the very first stream you ever did. And my first thought was, oh my God, they're eating on stream and they left their cameras on during the break. And you know what's funny though? So did I. My very first stream, I did the exact same thing. And I'm like, that's awful. And it's a bunch of us for 10, 12 minutes sort of saying, well, I guess we're like, yeah, this is pretty funny. Isn't this great
Yeah.
that we're doing this and we're live eating Doritos on YouTube? I'm sure everyone is staying up, like on the edge of their seats, so excited by this. And it made me feel a little better about
Oh
myself
heck yeah!
that little
Like it's
Kevin
growing pains,
Madison
right?
those years ago, what's funny is within like a game or two, I had created like a little countdown clock that I just throw up and just have go
Yeah.
so people know we're coming back. But it's so funny that you say that. I'm so happy to know I'm not the only one.
Oh, of course. Like, and like it's a learning process. You figure out what works, and then like we changed in the hardware we use has changed as well too. And then when we didn't monetize for a really long time, and then we only, I think a year ago is when we started finally actually running ads, and now YouTube is running ads whether you want to run them or not. So you know you might as well get that income.
Yeah,
What the
yeah.
paltry income there is from it.
I
But we use that now to help offset sort of some of the costs for the players. So like books and things like that, we use that money to pay their stuff. But um, I don't know. I mean, like just it started off that way, and then like I played in one campaign with a bunch of strangers who became friends afterwards, and I it just sort of steamrolled from there, you know. And then
yeah.
like I slowly started adding. We changed who we were playing with, because like a lot of the players that I was playing with regularly, they fell off, or you know had other things come up in their life. And for a while there was only like 3 of us who were playing on Wednesdays and Fridays, and then
Yeah.
I got more players, and then I like tentatively added another day, and then I found I was managing that okay with everything, and then added another day, and then found I was managing that okay, and yeah, it has sort of ended up where it is. One of the things that I oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I was just gonna ask, were you consciously going? So you're up to about 5,000 subscribers now, and I
Yep.
always kind of wonder this. Have you tried to cultivate subscribers? Did it just sort of happen because come hell or come high water, you're gonna stream and people are, if they want to watch or like, is this some combination, or how did
So
that?
there's a guy named I think it's either Ryan or Rain Somner who does a couple of web comics. He does Looking for Group. He's the writer for that, and he's the writer for Least I Could Do. And I honestly don't know. Looking for Group is still active, I think. I don't know if Least I Could Do is still active, but one of the things that I really appreciated with that he had said was, the difference between a pro web cartoonist and an amateur web cartoonist is the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
If you make a commitment to post a comic Wednesdays and Fridays, it better be there every single Wednesdays and Friday.
Yeah.
Because that's the commitment you make with your audience. And that always stuck with me of like, yeah, that's the thing. Like because it's there's comics that I stopped following online because I just once when one or two they were late one day and then later they missed a week or whatever, that it sucks. Like, I mean, you feel for the people who are, because it's real people who are creating these things, but it breaks that habit, and then you just don't go back to it. There's comics I don't read anymore because I have no earthly idea what's happening in PvP online, because the creator Scott Kurtz, who's a great fucking cartoonist, and he played D&D as well. He just fell out. He had some challenges in his life and kind of fell out of the habit of posting, and I just stopped reading.
Right.
And I have the same attitude towards, before we even were streaming though, I had that attitude towards the players where if you're showing up, we're playing something. I don't care what it is. Like if we're not able to carry on with the regular game, for myself, I hated when I set aside time for gaming and I get together and I'd be like, oh, so-and-so and so-and-so can't make it. So, they're really important for the story. So we can't play. Let's just hang out and chat. And it's like, no, we can chat any other time. Let's play a game.
Right.
Give me something, So that's the thing, the commitment I had to the players. I do the same thing with our audience. That's the extent, I think, of the commitment. I'm mindful now that I think a lot of the people that have come to our channel are fans of a specific system, are like AD&D second edition fans in particular, because we've run so much of that over the last little while. But you also see huge spikes when we run other things, like we have our regular viewers who are every week coming to watch us play Night Below, which is in like 120,
I know.
sessions right now.
I know.
Yeah. But we recently we ran a session of Simba Room recently that like has like 600 views already, which is for our channel pretty, that's a lot of attention. There's other ones too where the overviews are the things that obviously get the most attention. When I'm doing viewers may not or your viewers may not know, but I do these exhaustive overviews of different games, and they are very long and they're unscripted, and they just go.
And
so,
they're good.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. Others look for more palatable or manageable bite-sized chunks for things, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But what I like doing is those. There are a lot of work beforehand to make sure I've got everything clear in my head. I mean, like we've got, like, for instance, the Conan 2D20 game. Without fail, we get huge spikes for those particular sessions because people, our audience, loves seeing those things, and I hear from people as well too. And there's that old adage about, like, for each letter that you get, you can assume there's 10 to 100 that are feeling the same way that just didn't bother to write.
Right.
It's a similar kind of thing with comments, right? Like if you're getting comments on things. But when you're transitioning to what that comes with is also the, when you transition, you're going to see sometimes negative feedback for things as they're not getting what they told you, what they thought they were going to get if they came to our channel.
May I ask then what, like, because I think this is, I can't stand the whole negative commenting thing. Like, I get, as a teacher, I get critiquing, I get reflecting and changing, but the whole negative commenting, can you give me an example? Like, what would somebody, like, are you saying they'd show up for AD&D, they'd see Conan and be like, this sucks, and like, I'm never coming back?
So it'll be, So there's a difference I make between like negative feedback and shit posting.
Okay.
Shit posters are things like, um, there's just a step one further back too.
Hmm.
There's that quote that's attributed to Maya Angelou about, when someone shows you who they are, believe them. I 100% embrace that as my approach to allowing people to comment on the channel. I curate the comments on our channel
Right.
pretty rigorously because it's, for me, it's my audience, it's
Yeah.
my, guard and whatnot too.
Yeah.
If someone posts something that is constructive or productive or can add something, even if they disagree with me, I'm totally fine with that. But if I get the sense that they are assheads, or it's
Yeah.
clear that that's the case, it's gone. They're blocked.
Right.
I don't give second chances for anybody for this stuff because it's just not worth it. Like,
Yeah.
I've tried in the past to be more careful with that. I mean, like, hey, blah blah blah. There are other times where though I like, if you look at my early recordings and now, I have a tendency to speak very quickly anyway. And in some of those early sessions, in particular at the start of a session, it's incomprehensible how fast I'm talking. And I've done a much better job of slowing down my pace of speaking. But there's people who will post shitty things about, oh, you're doing this or you're doing
Right.
that, and with a couple of them I did constructively. I was like, look, at the time I'm conscious of how fast I'm speaking, and it's something I'm working on, or the filler sounds and things like that. And the reason I bothered to respond to that stuff is because then other people will, for one, it makes that person hopefully, uh, if as long as it's not just a genuinely shitty thing like you're an asshole,
Right.
or whatever.
Right.
If it's something that says that where they think that they're being helpful, I'd like to respond and say like, no, blah blah blah, because maybe it'll help them understand, like, yeah, it's a thing that we're aware of. Every YouTuber
Yeah.
is aware of what they sound like and how they present on air, and it also will hopefully, prevent the next person from going on and being like, oh, okay, that's already covered.
Right.
And it shows that you're being, even for people who aren't interested one way or the other, that you're being even handed with it. The feedback is more direct in terms of what I mean for the things that are less well received is just
Mhm.
downvotes. When you're suddenly seeing downvotes on
Oh.
sessions, you're like, oh, I didn't expect that would be the case. Sometimes you will see a sudden, like for my channel at least, you'll see a sudden spike in downvotes when we ban a vocal dickhead,
Right.
because they'll sort of hate watch, and then without fail every single thing will have one. Like, there was a span there after
Right.
we got rid of one person where like every single thing, so they were probably still subscribed, which meant that it was still showing up. And then I could be totally wrong about this, but it's weird that we had no downvotes on a series before, and then suddenly everything got a downvote for a period of time before that person clearly got bored and moved on.
It's very interesting that you mention this because as a newbie to all of this myself, with
Mhm.
an incredibly fragile ego, I haven't become Buddhist yet.
Yeah.
With a fragile ego, I noticed that I did some research, and what I found out, and you probably already knew this, but I guess YouTube is really looking at the downvote system and like the thumbs down and all that, and thinking about eliminating it. And I think they're also filtering it because they've realized that it's detrimental to people's mental health is at times when they get all these negative votes and they're sort of thinking, well, we want to do something a little bit more positive or a little bit easier on the people, and we want to encourage people to stream and do stuff.
Yeah.
So I've noticed I've done streams that will go up by, when I say up, they'll go up by down votes, like 3 or 4, and then I'll be like, oh my God, I'll go into a dark room and cry for about 24 hours.
Yeah.
And when I emerge from it, though, suddenly they're gone. And then there'll be a few more that pop up. And I think YouTube has, and now I'm sure the viewers are getting a little disinterested, but I think as from a streaming perspective and RPG perspective, this is interesting. I think YouTube is sort of going in there and they do something where they sort of like, look, if somebody's just mass downvoting something, we're going to erase that.
Well, there's weird things that can happen at different parts of your channel's history as well too, where they will eliminate upvotes because they think that it comes from spam channels. So like, because we had a very brief, I've transitioned to just having, I don't display likes and dislikes on videos anymore, partly because of psychological things. And I don't want people coming in thinking like, oh, this has got a, you know, whatever. Um, I've never had a video where the downvotes, knock wood, have outweighed the upvotes yet. But you know, we had things where regularly we could rely on people upvoting stuff, and we'd see at the end of a stream and have X amount, and then I go next morning and all the likes are gone. You're like, what the hell?
Right.
That went away after about a 3-week period, but
Yeah.
it's a weird hiccup. So like that's what I mean by like the level of engagement that we get for certain things, the amount that people will be commenting, the amount of people who show up live for the streams, because we have the chat active during our games. That is what I use to gauge like the level of interest, and then also the views, right? Like how many views we end up with different games. And the one thing I've realized with recently, because we've just got a bigger audience now than we've had since the last time we've made sort of a big change. And like we don't have any big changes planned in our programming right now, but we've been playing a lot of Savage Pathfinder in the lead up towards this, and that took a month for it to find its audience, you know, for people. And I actually, like, I shot a video specifically explaining what the game is and how things play, so that the viewers would be able to follow along the mechanics. Because if you're an old school Grognard player who loves Advancing Dragons, you know, and then suddenly you're like, why are there cards on the table? What is going on? You know, that can be there's big chunks of that are just not going to be parts of the thing that you can engage with.
Yeah.
Whereas if we shoot that, then hopefully, and then that did seem to help. Or, well, I'm not sure if it helped directly, but it seemed like we had a lot better engagement with the game, people showing up, people commenting, you know, and once they had that sort of those fundamentals. But in terms of the planning, like I have that in the back of my head about, you know, if we decided to say, you know, stop running AD&D second edition on the channel, I have no idea what would happen to our audience, you know, because I don't know. We try not to, we don't run any sponsored content on the channel. So like, we're not, you know, married to any one publisher. There's a couple other things that I don't like. I just made the decision not to do with the channel. We don't do giveaways. We don't do like prizes for hitting subscriber goals or things like that. All of those things are tied directly to the charity initiatives on the channel. But it's, I don't know. I mean, it doesn't stop me from running the games that I love to run or that I want to try.
I think that's pretty clear. I mean, one of the things that I had sort of mentioned, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't, from watching your channel, I don't feel like you're in this for fame and fortune. I don't think anyone running a YouTube stream necessarily, except for like the top of the iceberg, is in it for the fame and fortune. And that's why, I mean, you don't have to do 3 or 4 streams in a week. Like, nobody has to really do that. And that's why, to me, you stood out as someone, this guy enjoys, you know, playing RPGs. He enjoys streaming them. And one thing I was going to note, and you had mentioned how you keep your chat open, is your chat's very comfortable. Like, what's interesting to me is that for those of you that haven't watched I haven't watched all of them, but I've watched quite a few. And your chats are very comfortable. I feel like you have some familiars that are some people that know each other pretty well, at least through chatting maybe on your channel.
Yep.
And they're talking, and like a few of your players sometimes are responding in the chat. And there's like, they were talking about Russian history because you made the reference in your game this weekend. And there were like people talking in Russian, and I'm like, that's BS. And I plugged it into Google Translate, and it was not BS. It was Russian. So there's something very comfortable like about your chat and your stream, and maybe the regularity of it or the dependability, maybe.
Yeah. Like we really try to, we really don't want to be you know, gatekeeping or exclusive or any stuff like that. Like we really want to make sure that anybody who wants to hang out or play games or talk about games can show up in chat, can show up in the Discord or whatever else. Because we run some old school games, some people in that community can be very much that way, you know? So we clamp down on like no addition warring, no shit talking other games and whatnot, because it's just, there is nothing productive from that.
Right.
Particularly if someone likes something, why add in as a response, oh, I don't like that. Who gives a shit?
Right. Well,
like,
What's really
Like,
interesting, you in one of the interviews I watched with you, you had a very interesting response. Someone asked you like about what games you review or like how you comment or whatever, and you said, "Well, if I don't like a game, I just don't review it." And
yeah,
it reminds me actually of something that the film critic Roger Ebert said in like his last few years. Like people started sort of going after him and they'd say, "Oh, you've softened up and every single one of your reviews is just a positive review and you've lost your edge." And he said, I haven't lost my edge. I've kind of lost time for, spending things writing negative stuff up. And
hmm
if I'm going to spend my life, the last few years of my life, doing something, I'm going to, talk about stuff that I want to spread the great, information about.
yep, 100% agree.
And I think it
Yeah,
was really nice to see someone say something like that. And I apologize to the person that gave the interview. I want to give them a shout out too. Maybe I'll put a link in the description, but
mm.
it was great that they asked that question. It was really good that you had that kind of response and kept that
Well, it
attitude.
is. There's so much negative stuff on, on YouTube and the internet in general. And this sounds so like old man on a porch stuff, but
Well,
I am an old
Sonny.
man. And
Yeah.
sometimes I'm on a porch. But it just I just don't I have no interest in engaging with that stuff. If it's a negative thing or if I don't like it, why do I have it in my life?
Yeah.
There's games that I just we've tried on the channel. Very few of them. Normally, we can find something that we like about them, and then they may not be the right fit for us. But it's not like this is an irretrievably uh, written game.
Yeah.
And if you know anyone too, like who works in creative industries, when you try and actually create stuff yourself, like
Yeah.
making a comic is so fucking hard.
Yes.
It takes so much, and like the idea of these guys who and well, these folks who grind in, month out to get that stuff out is
Yeah.
mind blowing.
Yeah.
Same thing with films. Like I've got friends who work in the entertainment industry as well, and like nobody sets out to make a bad movie or a
Right.
bad film or a bad game. So
Right.
there's also an enormous amount of work that went into this, and maybe something went wrong or whatnot. It's rare that something comes out as a piece of garbage that they intended to be that way.
Yes. Yes.
So with that in mind, like it's just like how are you helping other people? I don't do like a lot of reviews, and that's why I intentionally phrase mine as overviews, because I want you to understand it and then make a call for
Right.
yourself as to whether it's for you or not. Because taste is subjective. So there are people who will like running D&D or AD&D first or second edition, and there's people who will hate running that stuff, and it's not intrinsically anything wrong with the game. It's that it's not the right fit for you, and that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
So
I've
yeah.
a very healthy attitude, and I guess this is kind of a good segue into maybe a final few questions I kind of wanted to ask about. And that was I was kind of wondering, what have you gotten out of your RPG gaming? What have you gotten out of your streaming? Like, how do you feel that you're a little different as a person after? And maybe your dog is either objecting or is like, he doesn't feed me as much as he used to. I remember when he played with me 3 or 4 nights out of the week, and now he just sits there with his keyboard box and just like talks to it all day. But what do you feel like you've kind of gotten out of these years of gaming, if anything?
Yeah.
Could be nothing.
Oh, I mean, definitely. Oh, absolutely. Like honestly, like just for the years of gaming, setting aside streaming, the the skills that I gained out of prepping and running games are an enormous amount of things that I use in my day job. Being able to read through things quickly and critically analyze it and make sense of intended rules, that stuff's my day job.
Yeah.
Communicate with others, work together, come to task like to resolution of disputes. That's again all of my day job stuff too. So the gaming that I did as a kid, it all that stuff that helped prep me for what would eventually be my career. And I'm not I was never a kid who knew they wanted to be a lawyer. It was something that as an adult I was like, this is what these guys do. Like I can do this. Come on.
Right.
So there's that. And the stuff that everyone, I think, or a lot of people get out of it too, lifelong friends and whatnot. In a strictly self-serving thing, my presentation, and this carries over to my day job, is much better now. I don't speak nearly as quickly as what I used to because I have to talk for hours on end and be understood every session.
Yeah.
You know? And that's something that helps me in my day job because a lot of that is also talking. I'm the type of lawyer who is involved in lawsuits and things like that. Usually acting for people. It's rare that I'm actually sued, but you know.
There's always the future.
Yeah, exactly. You know,
who knows?
knock wood.
That's right. Maybe little Andrew, you call him a masochist tonight. You're gonna get served for that, and I'm gonna be like a witness or something.
Well, it's only slander if it's not true.
So, I was gonna say, I keep interrupting you. Well, I was just going to say it's very interesting that you took the tact of telling me that RPGs, and I guess I asked the question in, was sort of leaning this way, but you're saying that RPGs were helping you with your presentations and maybe with being in the courtroom and all of that. Yep. Do you find, like I found this, I bring my teaching into gaming all the time. Like I feel like I run my games the way I run my classroom in many ways. Do you ever feel like you're running your games a bit like you might?
Oh yeah, I mean to a degree, right? Like it's not a lot of my day job work involves asking questions and managing the answers that I'm getting. So and whether it's talking to other counsel or appearing in court or appearing at trial or discoveries, there's an element of using oral communication to try and get what you need or want or whatever. That's a very mercenary and self-serving way of talking about it, but I mean it's really what it is.
Yeah.
And for the game, it helps to be mindful of one thing that is helpful with running the games and that transitions back and forth between the day job is that you're talking while you're trying to get towards something.
Right.
And the being able to keeping them in the back of your mind where, like, say, a session's going to end.
Yeah.
That's very similar to knowing what point you want to get to in the series of a line of questioning.
Right.
And that is, it's transferable for both ways. I won't, at least I hope I don't, cross-examine my players because that's really boring. They're just giving yes or no. But I mean, I am. One of the things that we do in the day job too is break bad news to clients, right? And the way that I always try and do that is by keeping that distance between. This is not my opinion. This is what the case law is, right? Like if I need to say this, if a client feels, this is how this should resolve, and I can say, well, you know what? Like I understand completely where you're coming from. However, how recent case law has been with respect to that particular issue,
right?
And at present, based on that, this is where it's going to end up. So I get where you're coming from, but if this does go forward and is put before a court, this is where it's likely to end up based on X, Y, Z.
Yes.
And that having that detachment from the rules, as it were, from what's actually happening and still being able to empathize with the players, totally the same thing of like, shit, I just rolled a critical hit on you. And now you got to, take this much damage or soak this much damage. And like, I don't want this to happen to you. I really don't, but it's what's happened.
What's interesting about your example is that you, and I haven't quite been able to label it yet, and I'm sure some like linguistic scholar somewhere has labeled what happens here. But there are a lot of times I think when game masters think that there are just sort of like 2 or 3 modes of being a game master. Like one mode of game master is when you do the character and you literally say like what's going on. Then the other mode maybe of game mastering is when the player rolls a die and they get a result and you say yes or no, right? So there's like these 2 modes, and you have to sort of make an interpretation. But sometimes I find when I am playing or when I am running a game that I need a character will ask me or a player will ask me a question, and my response is not going to be a voice and it's not going to be the result of a die roll. It's going to be me saying, okay, look, your character has lived in this world for 15 years. The feeling and impression that you get from this is that he may be lying right now. And he's showing certain things that are kind of like tells that you would be able to notice, but you're not 100% sure. So I feel like there's this alternate mode that is somewhere between the 2, and you're sort of leaving it open to interpretation, but at the same time, you're sort of shortcutting things and allowing that
what you're doing is you're engaging. I mean, I think that's a really helpful example to talk about, like how the narrative and the mechanics function together
yeah,
to make the thing, right. Like the one of the things we do in our games that that other tables either don't do or they come up with reasons for it is um, like in the old days we used to call it blue haze, right? Like
mm-hmm.
when a player wasn't there, their character would haze out, and sometimes we would come up with elaborate reasons in fiction for why that happened. And it was recently that it dawned on me, like, why do we care?
Right,
Like, it doesn't matter. We're here to play a game. We're not like the thing
right,
that is that hinges on my investment and what I want to have out of a session is what's happening in that session. It's
yeah,
not the elaborate explanation for why Velka isn't
right,
here today or why
yes,
so and so, right? Like it's and it comes down to that it's a game. It's
yeah,
not a TV show. It's not a movie. Movies and TV shows, if there is discontinuity, they can take you out of that.
right,
But TV shows in particular already have discontinuity. If you end a session with or end an episode with a guest star in it, that guest star may not be scripted or may not be contracted to be back the next episode.
right,
So they may end with so and so, and the opening of the next session is them saying like, "Well, director so and what's is gone now," and like he said, blah blah blah, and
right,
they go on from there. And in a similar way with games, I mean, to not recognize the importance of there being a game there to interact with, regardless of whether it's something really crunchy like Rollmaster or like Advanced Dungeons and Dragons or Phoenix Command,
yeah,
for a really really intense game, up to the other end of the spectrum with the story games like Powered by the Apocalypse or Blaze in the Dark or whatnot. There's still a game structure that's there, and what makes it the fun thing is, like you just said, is the players get if that's the information they get, then they get to make not only a decision based on the fiction, they also get a chance to look at their character sheet or think about their character's capabilities and personalities and whatever else, and they may be able to come up with some way of like, I'm connected with whatever guild in town, and this dude I know has some kind of connection with guild in town, so maybe I'm going to try and infer to get a reroll on this to try and loosen him up, right?
Right. And you're not hinting or you're not steering to me. It's just telling the player something that they might have forgotten because they're actually a human being that's playing a character in this world that no one has ever actually inhabited. But as a game master, I feel obligated to sort of hint and say, look, you would probably be able to infer something or
and that's absolutely, and I think that's what those game mechanics are for as well too, is right to get around. Players may not know stuff about certain things or certain worlds or whatnot, and there's a mild difference between info dumps where you just sit there and like read out, and then in the fourth age of so and so this happened, and what you're saying, which is, okay, I'm going to interrupt the role playing here just to here's some stuff that your character wouldn't know. Now you go ahead and do what you want with that information. I think that's a really great way of encouraging an interaction between the game mechanics and the fiction as it's sort of rolling out.
Yeah. So tell me, last question. What are your plans for the future, either with the channel or without the channel, or what are you up to with gaming in general?
I mean, carrying, to be honest, it's the one thing that I find at the end of every session, like right now we're at the end of the gaming marathon, and it went really, really, like everyone seemed to have a really good time, and it was a nice way of thanking everyone for participating in the channel for such a long time too, and also for the audience. It's a change from what we usually do, which is just ongoing games. It's a proper 4-part thing. So with that done, the next thing I got to focus on is our next charity game, which is going to be episode or a single session of Star Trek Adventures, which will be a lot of fun. It's a great system, great game. We are now transitioning. The players had so much fun with their characters in the Savage Pathfinder Iron Gods game that we played, that we're going to carry on with these guys. Our Sunday sessions are now transitioning over to be Iron Gods, so that's going to be a lot of fun to prep and play for that. And it's we don't do a lot of we don't do session zeros usually on the channel. We'll do like character creation sessions where we're just kind of banging around a game to see what kind of characters come out from it. I've got a list of games that I really want to get to the channel between now and the end of year. We have more charity sessions coming up. I've got some player appreciation sessions as well too, which are coming up, which will be fun games. Things in the past, we run a charity on the channel called Heroes Save Villages that benefits this organization called SOS Children's Villages International. And it in the past, players have often, I used to offer these 4-hour sessions. If you donated $100, I'd run a 4-hour game for you with your friends or maybe some people from the channel or whatever. And they would pick the game and whatnot. And what ended up happening is that a lot of the players ended up donating. And it's like, guys, if you want me to run a game for you, you don't need to. I appreciate you donating. I care about this charity, but
right.
Like if you want me to run a game for you, just let me know. And this year, we didn't. We tried something different, and we've been enormously fortunate with the generosity of the Dungeon Musings community, and we've raised like my annual target. We've almost hit, and it's not even the end of June yet. Like,
oh, no kidding! Oh, wow.
Oh, it's terrific, and we've
That's
got
great.
This isn't a sponsored thing, but like the one partner we have is Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse, who it's a company made by Matt Lillard and like the actor and his friends
cool.
he played with. They make these like deluxe editions of D&D 5th edition adventures. So they go from platinum down to the silver editions, and they're these gorgeous extra things. And they've been donating copies of their products, which are limited in number. Yeah. So like it's fantastic. But yeah. So anyway, we're the charity sessions we raise, when people donate to the initiative, they get to vote for what games we play for the charity sessions, and then in the lead up, they get to actually, sometimes it's outfitting heroes with different gear. Sometimes it's going to be like in this case, pick